It was just before midnight. The city looked hazy and foreign, veiled in mist where the rain fell like thin threads. The orange glow of the streetlights fractured through the raindrops, reflecting on the asphalt in colors that trembled like a constantly flickering film scene. As water gathered on the taxi's windows and the wipers brushed it away in a steady rhythm, Richard gripped the wheel tightly, his weary eyes fixed on the narrow streets ahead. Richard didn't know anyone in this city. He had been living here for 3 years, yet it still felt alien. Driving a taxi had been a choice born of necessity. In the crowded days and the deserted nights, these streets were where he had his briefest yet most intense interactions with people. This night had begun no differently than the others. The silence, the hum of the engine, and the sound of rain striking the glass gave him a strange sense of peace. His first passenger had been from a hotel downtown, a hurried businessman in a black suit. They drove to the airport without exchanging a word. The man pulled out his credit card, paid quickly, and vanished in his rush to catch his flight. Left alone again, Richard felt the city showing him its unsettling face once more. The streets were empty. Only the occasional glare of oncoming headlights and the distant echo of sirens broke the stillness. The faint smell of cigarettes clung to the interior of the car, mixing with the dampness of the rain, and as the night wore on, the air grew heavier. The radio was on, but it had locked onto a station with static. Distorted melodies blended with the rhythm of the rain, creating a dissonant background. Richard was used to nights like this, yet there were parts of the city he preferred to avoid. The narrow lanes behind the docks, the abandoned warehouses, the silent figures loitering near club doors. All of it made him uneasy. By the time the clock neared 1, the taximeter had been idle for too long. Richard noticed the rain falling harder now. Streams of water raced each other across the windows, narrowing his view. He was just about to pull over at a stop to light a cigarette when a silhouette beneath a street lamp caught his eye. A tall, thin man. A hood pulled over his head, face obscured in shadow. When the taxi came into sight, the man raised his hand slightly. The gesture wasn't hurried, more like he had been standing there for hours, waiting. Richard pressed the brake, unlocked the door. The man entered with heavy steps and sat down. "Good evening," he said in a low voice. His accent was strange. The words rolled carelessly from his tongue. Richard nodded in greeting. "Where to?" The man stared for a moment. A silence stretched out. Then he pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it forward. An address. North of the city, near the docks. One of the places Richard disliked going. "All right," Richard said, trying to sound steady, though a knot tightened in his throat. As the car rolled forward, the silence inside grew denser. The passenger leaned back, hands folded on his knees. He didn't look out the windows, didn't fidget, just sat there, eyes fixed ahead. Richard glanced at him a few times through the rearview mirror, but the man's face remained indistinct. The taximeter ticked on, and the city slowly receded behind them. As the bright downtown faded, the buildings grew sparser. Shadows stretched long from warehouses along the roadside. Chain-link fences enclosed empty lots, and the wet asphalt reflected the flicker of the occasional neon sign. Richard disliked silences like this. Usually, even the most trivial chatter from a passenger helped dissolve the tension. But this man said nothing, asked nothing, hardly moved. All he did was sit there, his presence filling the cab with an oppressive weight. After 15 minutes, they turned onto a narrow road. The metallic tang of rain seemed sharper here. Richard checked the address on the slip again. Ahead lay a road leading to a cluster of warehouses, all seemingly abandoned. Streetlights were sparse, most of them flickering weakly. "You sure about this?" Richard asked, his voice forced into casualness. Without turning his head, the man answered with a single word. "Yes." A chill stirred in Richard's gut. Picking up lone passengers in places like this was never wise. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Still, the wheel was in his hands, and he had no excuse to turn back. When they reached the warehouses, the man suddenly leaned forward. Richard flinched. The man's hand went into his pocket, and Richard held his breath. But all he pulled out was a handful of banknotes. "Stop here." Richard hit the brake. The man didn't open the door. As he handed the money over, his eyes met Richard's for the first time. Pale, lifeless eyes. His face was expressionless. "Wait," he said in a hushed voice. 5 minutes. Richard took the money, but said nothing. The man opened the door, stepped out into the rain, pulled his hood tighter, and disappeared quickly into the dark. The car fell silent. The engine idled. The wipers beat rhythmically against the windshield. Richard's palms were damp on the wheel. He watched the man's retreating figure in the mirror, then realized he had vanished from sight. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Still no sign of him. Richard's unease grew heavier. Staring at the warehouse entrance through the rain, he caught a flicker of movement in the shadows. Suddenly, something collapsed into the light of the headlights. A shape sprawled on the ground. Richard squinted. It was a body. His breath seized. The door yanked open without warning. The man was back. Rain glistened on him, but his face was unchanged, still wearing that vacant look. He sat down as if nothing had happened. "Drive," he said. Richard stared at the wheel, then glanced at him through the mirror. In those eyes, there was a coldness he couldn't comprehend. The air inside the cab felt heavier, as though the oxygen had been sucked away. His heart pounded violently. The man sat silently. But the shadow he had left outside refused to leave Richard's mind. Richard's hands were still glued to the wheel. The hum of the engine and the rain slapping against the windshield merged with the suffocating silence inside the cab. The man in the passenger seat leaned back calmly, as if nothing had happened outside just moments ago. "Drive," he had said. But where? Richard had already reached the address. There was nothing here but these deserted warehouses. Where do you want me to go?" he asked, swallowing the knot in his throat. The man slowly turned his head. For the first time, he looked directly into Richard's eyes. Those dull, empty eyes carried such a chilling coldness that an icy shiver crawled down Richard's spine. "Keep driving," he repeated. There was no threat in his voice, but the certainty allowed no argument. Richard pressed the gas without thinking. The car crawled forward across the rain-slick asphalt. The headlights cut into the road ahead, but the rain fractured the beams, making every corner look like a shadow waiting to pounce. The silence lingered. Questions pounded in Richard's mind. The body he thought he saw? Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it had just been a garbage bag, a fallen sack. But the passenger's calmness, his refusal to speak, the way he acted as if nothing had happened. This was what suffocated Richard's chest. Suddenly, the man leaned forward. From his pocket, he pulled a small leather-bound notebook. He flipped through the pages. Richard caught glimpses of drawings and addresses. On some pages, there were photographs. Faces. Different faces. "Who are they?" Richard asked, before realizing he had spoken aloud. The man slowly closed the notebook and stared at him again. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Better if you don't know." Richard's throat tightened. His grip on the wheel grew harder. At a junction, the man said, "Turn right." His tone was sharper this time. Richard obeyed without hesitation. The streets grew more desolate. The buildings thinned out, leaving only rusted fences and broken signs along the roadside. As the taxi pushed further toward the city's edge, the unease inside Richard became unbearable. Who this man was, what he had done, what he had left behind, it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was survival. "Look," Richard said, summoning a shred of courage. "The night's long. I've got work to do." "If you're not going anywhere else." The man's hand shot to his pocket. Richard's heart nearly stopped. But what came out wasn't money. It was a knife. A thin, long blade pitted with rust. Under the headlights, the metal glistened. "Keep driving," he said, lower now, but infinitely more dangerous. Richard's blood ran cold. The cramped taxi felt like a tomb. Even breathing was hard. Minutes later, the road twisted into a forest. The rain had eased, but a heavy fog was setting in. White veils of mist rolled into the headlights, blinding the way forward. Finally, the man spoke. "You know, people vanish in this city. The newspapers barely mention it. The police don't care. But every night someone disappears, and no one even notices." Richard locked his eyes on the road. The man's voice was a blade of ice. You're just an ordinary cab driver. Your name, your past, it doesn't matter. No one's coming for you. You could be one of them. One of the missing." The words thundered in Richard's skull. Sweat poured down his brow, stinging his eyes. Inside, he was screaming. Outwardly, only ragged breaths betrayed him. Then, up ahead, a fallen tree blocked the road. Richard slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a halt. The engine hummed low, and then silence. Only the rain and the wipers filled the cab. The man held the knife. "Out," he said. Richard's hands shook. "Listen, I'll give you money. I'll drive you wherever you want. But out," the man repeated. Richard moved slowly, pushing the door open. Rain struck his face like slaps. Cold air clawed into his lungs. Standing in the middle of the road, swallowed by fog, the pounding of his own heart deafened him. The man stepped out too, knife still in hand. He didn't rush. He savored it. Each step toward Richard was deliberate. Richard stumbled back. His foot sank into mud, nearly dropping him. "Please, don't do this," he begged, his voice hoarse and broken. The man said nothing. His eyes, empty and cold, never changed. Then, in a sudden burst, he lunged. The knife slashed the air, just missing Richard. Panic exploded in his chest. He spun, searching wildly. Only one choice: the forest. He bolted into the fog-drenched trees. Mud sucked at his shoes. Branches clawed at his face. Behind him, footsteps followed. Slow, steady, relentless, like death itself. His lungs burned. At last, he reached a rise. Below, faint headlights pierced the fog. His taxi, still there, idling by the road. But going back was impossible. The man was still coming. Richard's foot slipped, sending him crashing to the ground. His face slammed into mud. A hot breath prickled the back of his neck. The man was there. The knife gleamed above him. With a final desperate gasp, Richard grabbed a thick branch from the ground and swung with all his strength. The wood smashed into the man's face. He staggered, blood spilling from his mouth, but his gaze never softened. "You can run," he rasped, "but you can't hide." Richard tore away, running blind through the fog. The forest was a labyrinth with no exit. Footsteps never faded. Death's shadow clung to him. Minutes stretched into hours. At last he saw a faint glow ahead. A road, a bridge, maybe even a settlement. It didn't matter. It was hope. He sprinted toward the light. His chest threatened to burst. Then, his foot found nothing. A cliff. The rain-slick ground betrayed him. He tried to stop, but too late. His body tipped forward, weightless. A scream ripped through the fog. Richard tumbled into darkness. Silence. The man stood at the cliff's edge, knife in hand, staring down with that same expressionless gaze. The mist swallowed everything below. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned and disappeared back into the fog. The rain kept falling. The taxi's headlights still glowed. The engine still idled, but the driver would never sit behind the wheel again.